The folding chair he told me to sit on was broken, shoved behind the garage like an afterthought. But it wasn't the splintering wood or the rusted hinges that cut. Might was his voice, sharp and dismissive, telling me to head inside. Mom, this is just a hangout with the guys. I'd raised him. Alone. I'd worked 3 jobs to pay for his college, sold my mother's piano so he could have a car, stood in the rain with a handmade sign at every one of his baseball games. And now, at 68, my place was inside, forgotten like a leftover salad. It was a sunny Sunday afternoon, one of those rare clear days in late October when the breeze still carried warmth. Jason had invited his friends over for a barbecue at our house, the house I bought and kept and loved. He didn't ask me if he could use it, didn't even mention it until I came downstairs and saw the grill fired up in the backyard and strange cars lining our driveway. I wasn't angry at first. I was surprised, confused. "Hey, Ma," he'd said, barely glancing up from a stack of burger patties. "Didn't think you'd be up. We're just gonna grill and hang out for a bit. You good to chill inside?" There was no invitation. No plate offered. No, "You should meet my friends," or even, "Want to sit with us?" Just that brisk dismissal. I nodded, numb, and then I sat in that broken chair for exactly 12 minutes, until I got up, went inside, and made a decision. I had never wanted to feel small in my own home. When my husband left, Jason was just 7. Then I decided I would never let anyone make me invisible again. I'd fought too hard, scrubbed too many toilets, folded too many uniforms in the break room of Dollar Town. I didn't survive all that to become an unwanted background prop in my own story. I went upstairs, closed my bedroom door quietly, and sat at my vanity. My hands were shaking, but not with sadness anymore. With purpose. I looked into the mirror, past the thinning gray hair, past the tired lines that traced my mouth. My eyes, though older, were still sharp, still firelit. "You don't get to erase me, Jason," I whispered. "Not today." Jason didn't know that I'd been slowly packing. That for weeks, I'd been putting away photo albums and keepsakes. That the guest room closet had 2 suitcases tucked behind the coats. That I'd sold some of the old jewelry he never asked about and opened a savings account in my name. He didn't know I'd been planning to leave. Not out of bitterness, but because I deserved more. More than being tolerated. More than being told I was just old-fashioned. More than walking on eggshells around a son who never seemed to see me unless he needed clean socks or money for groceries. I'd stayed because he'd asked me to, after the divorce. He'd been in a rough patch, trying to start a business, paying off debts. I was his rock, he used to say. Now I was in his way. Downstairs, I heard laughter. Loud, youthful, unbothered. Someone clinked a beer bottle against another. Jason's voice rose above the others, bragging about his smoked ribs recipe like he'd invented fire. I went into the attic, pulled out the last box. Inside, the deed to the house. Still in my name. The copy of the letter I drafted to the realtor. Signed, sealed. And a bright blue envelope marked, for Jason. I placed it on the kitchen table. Inside was a letter. And the spare key. "Jason, I heard you today. Not your voice, but your message. It rang louder than you probably meant it to. You made it clear that I don't belong in your world anymore. That I'm a burden. An embarrassment. Something to be politely hidden when company comes over. So here's your freedom. I've sold the house. The papers are signed, and the new owners take possession next month. I'm leaving tonight. Where I'm going is my business, but know that I'm safe, and more importantly, at peace with this decision. I raised you with everything I had, but I didn't raise you to forget where you came from. One day, when the grill is cold and the friends are gone, you might remember the woman who stood behind you, even when you didn't see her. And maybe then, you'll understand the real meaning of home. Love. Mom." The letter was short, measured, just enough truth to sting, not burn. I didn't want revenge. I just wanted respect. And if I had to walk away to reclaim it, then that's what I would do. I packed the car quietly. It was already dusk when I turned the key and pulled out of the driveway. No one noticed. Not even Jason. The first place I stopped was the old lakeside motel 2 hours north. Room 12. I used to take Jason there when he was a boy. We'd fish off the dock, roast marshmallows by the fire pit. The man at the desk remembered me, gave me a soft smile, and even a slight discount. "Back again?" he asked. I smiled. Starting over. The next morning, my phone buzzed. 17 missed calls. 3 voicemails from Jason. I didn't listen. I wasn't ready. But I saw the message he'd texted. Mom, where are you? What do you mean, sold the house? Are you serious? You didn't even tell me. Please call me. This isn't funny. I put the phone back on the nightstand, wrapped the motel blanket tighter around my shoulders, and watched the mist rise from the lake. I felt something unfamiliar. Light. I stayed at the lake for a week. Walked the trails. Fed the ducks. Spoke to no one except the innkeeper and the cook who made blueberry pancakes each morning. And then I moved on. To the cabin I'd leased 6 months ago. Quiet, tucked into a wooded valley in upstate Vermont. Far from traffic. Far from barbecues. Far from disappointment. The neighbors were kind. Marta, across the lane, brought me fresh eggs and stories of her grandchildren who lived too far away. We laughed about everything. She taught me how to play bridge again. Said I hadn't lost my touch. I didn't know I needed this. I told her one morning as we sipped tea on her porch. What? She asked. This peace. This space. Myself. Jason kept calling. I let a few messages play out. His voice cracked by the 4th one. By the 8th, he was crying. Mom, I didn't mean it that way. I was just distracted. I didn't think it mattered. I didn't think you minded. I'm sorry. Please, just tell me you're okay. Please come home. But I was home. For the first time in decades. Jason didn't stop calling. By the 2nd week, his messages shifted from angry to desperate. Then, to quiet. Then, nothing at all. Silence, I found, was a strange kind of peace. It didn't feel like abandonment, it felt like breathing. I spent most mornings walking the narrow trail behind the cabin. It wound through a stretch of birch and maple that shivered silver in the early light. Sometimes I'd find deer tracks. Once, I saw a red fox dart across the bend like a flame in motion. It reminded me I was still alive. Still part of the world. Still more than someone's mother, someone's obligation. Still me. But old habits are hard to silence completely. By the 3rd week, I found myself scrolling back through old photos on my phone. Jason as a toddler, with peanut butter smeared across his cheeks. Jason in his graduation cap, arms slung proudly around my shoulder. Jason at Christmas, standing in the doorway, laughing. He hadn't always been this man. The one who shoved me aside with a careless word. He had once been a boy who cried when I scraped my knee. Who made me burnt toast in bed on Mother's Day. Who whispered, "Don't leave me, Mama," when storms rolled in too loud at night. Where had that boy gone? What had I allowed to fade while I gave him everything? It was Marta who finally said it out loud. You know, she said, stirring her coffee with a tiny silver spoon. You're allowed to miss someone and still know you were right to leave them. I looked up. She smiled, warm but firm. We think we have to choose. We don't. Love and hurt, those things live in the same room. That night, I opened my laptop and began typing. I didn't write to Jason. I wrote for me. For the woman who'd waited too long to claim her own space. For the mother who'd mistaken sacrifice for survival. For the grandmother I still hoped to be one day, and the girl I used to be before diapers and mortgages and night shifts stole my name. I wrote until dawn. In the spring, I joined the town library's memoir group. We met every Thursday in the upstairs reading room that smelled of old pine and printer ink. There were only 6 of us for women and 2 retired men, and we all had something we were trying to get out of our chests. The 2nd week, I read a chapter from what I titled When the House Isn't Home Anymore. When I finished, there was silence. Then someone clapped. And then they all did. You should publish this, a woman named Annie said. Seriously, you could help people. A lot of people. I laughed. I didn't write it for anyone but me. She smiled. That's exactly why people need to read it. That night, I printed out a copy of the manuscript, folded it gently, slid it into an envelope, and mailed it to Jason. No note, no explanation, just the story, as it was, as I lived it. 2 weeks passed, then 3. Then, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang. His name flashed on the screen. I let it ring 4 times, then answered. Hi, Mom, he said softly. I didn't speak. I waited. I got your pages. I read every word. Silence. I didn't know you felt all that, he said. I didn't know I made you feel like that. You didn't want to know, I said quietly. I know, he whispered. I know. He paused. I could hear him breathing, steadying himself. I was selfish, and stupid, and scared. Of what? I asked. Of losing control, of failing, of realizing that I'd become someone I used to promise I'd never be. I closed my eyes. I was trying to build a life, Mom, he said. And somewhere along the way, I stopped building it with you. I just moved you to the side. You made me invisible in my own house. I know, he said, and I can never undo that. There was something raw in his voice now, something stripped bare. But I want to try, if you'll let me. I looked out the window. Rain tapped against the glass like tiny questions. What would that look like, Jason? He hesitated, then said, I don't know. Not yet. But maybe it starts with me listening. Really listening. Maybe it means visiting. Or writing. Or just not assuming I'm the only one whose life matters. It wasn't a grand apology. But it was honest. The next week, a package arrived. No return address. Inside was a small, framed photo. Jason and Medican years ago at a community fair. I was laughing, my head tilted back. He had his arm around me, a corn dog in one hand, joy in his eyes. Taped to the back was a note in his handwriting. I see you now. In June, he came to visit. He brought flowers. He hugged me for a long time on the porch and didn't let go first. And then, after dinner, he asked, Can I see the woods behind your place? We walked the trail in silence. Just the wind and the rustling of new leaves. At one point, he reached for my hand. Held it like he hadn't since he was a boy. I miss you, he said. I miss me too, I said softly. We stood in that quiet truth together. That night, as he drove away, I didn't cry. Because I had nothing left to grieve. Only something to nurture. Something fragile. Something new. A connection no longer built on obligation, but on respect. And maybe, if we tended it just right, love. I wasn't naive. I knew a visit didn't rewrite years. But it was a beginning. And beginnings, I'd learned, don't belong only to the young. One morning, a month later, I opened my email and found a message from a small press. They'd read my manuscript. They wanted to publish it. They said it carried the ache and triumph of rediscovered worth. I sat still for a long time after reading that sentence. And then I laughed. Because they were right. I had rediscovered something. Not just worth, but voice. That summer, something shifted in me. I no longer waited for his calls. I no longer let the ache of our old life weigh me down. I had a new rhythm, now slow mornings with coffee and a book on the porch, weekly bridge games with Marta, and walks through the wildflowers behind the cabin. I began journaling more seriously, waking at 5:30 a.m. to catch the quietest moments of thought. I joined a small collective of women writers, some retired teachers, others former nurses, widows, artists, each with stories woven from heartbreak, survival, and healing. We met once a month in a community barn turned art space, where the windows leaked golden light and you could smell cedar in the floors. I read from my manuscript. They cried. I cried too. Because this time, the tears were not about Jason. They were about me. A month later, Jason called again. He'd just finished reading The Body Keeps the Score, a book on trauma. He sounded different. Calmer. Quieter. I think I understand you more, he said. I understand me more too. I was carrying a lot of anger I didn't know I had. Dad leaving. Money struggles. All of it. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. That's a start. Can I come again? He asked. Not just for dinner. Maybe stay nearby for a few days. Talk more. Of course, I said. Just not in the old way. Not as a guest expecting service, but as a visitor willing to listen. I wouldn't dream of anything else, he said. Jason arrived with a duffel bag, a notebook, and a look I hadn't seen in years, one of quiet intention. He had aged in just a few months, but in a good way. Softer, less sharp around the edges. We cooked together, talked long after the stars came out. He asked questions, this time real ones. What did you dream of when I was little? What did you give up that you never told me? What was it like being left by Dad? I answered slowly, sometimes through tears, sometimes with laughter, and sometimes, when the questions dug too deep, I just looked at him and said, Thank you for finally asking. He nodded. I didn't know what I didn't know. One morning, over breakfast, Jason said, I told Emma about all this. About how I treated you. She cried. Emma, his fiancée. I stiffened a little. He'd never mentioned her much before. She wants to meet you, he said. Wants to come up sometime. I wasn't sure what I felt, relief, fear, suspicion, but I smiled politely. We'll see. He didn't push it. That alone told me he'd grown. When fall came again, just as it had a year before on that barbecue day, I found myself back in the same mindset, but this time, everything had changed. Leaves drifted gently down the winding lane. The lake, where I now wrote daily, was still and silver. And inside me, peace had rooted. Not because Jason had returned to being the son I once knew, but because I had returned to being the woman I once lost. Then, something happened I didn't expect. Jason asked me to come speak. To his workplace. Wait, I said, stunned. You want me to what? We're doing this community engagement series. A few of my coworkers read your book. They asked if you'd come share your story. Jason, I'm not a speaker. You're more than that. You're a survivor, and your words have power. I hesitated. I don't want pity. You won't get pity. You'll get something better. Respect. I said yes, even though I was terrified. That Wednesday, I stood in front of a room of 30 people, most of them younger than Jason, and read from my memoir. When I got to the part about the barbecue, that moment I sat on a broken chair and realized my son had outgrown me emotionally. Something shifted in the room. People stopped fidgeting. Some leaned forward. One woman started to cry. And when I finished, they stood and clapped. Not politely. Genuinely. Jason stood too. Tears in his eyes. Not ashamed. Proud. On the drive back to Vermont, he said, "You didn't just change your life, Mom. You changed mine." I looked out the window at the trees whizzing past. It took losing everything to find myself again. He reached over, took my hand. "I'm glad you did." We reached my cabin just before dark. As we pulled into the driveway, I noticed a paper tucked under the porch railing. Jason grabbed it. It was a letter from the small publishing house. They were moving forward with national distribution. Bookstores. Readings. A small tour. I laughed. Jason lifted me in a hug and spun me around like he hadn't since he was 10 years old. Later that night, as I sat by the fireplace with a blanket over my legs and a cup of chamomile tea in my hands, I looked over at him sleeping on the sofa. The firelight danced on his face. Softer now. More open. He was becoming a man I could be proud of again. But more importantly, I was becoming a woman I could be proud of again. And that meant more than I ever imagined. The book came out that winter. The first box of author copies arrived in a brown parcel, corners slightly dented, the packing tape wrinkled with cold. But when I opened it, when I saw my name printed in serif typeface across that cream-colored cover, my hands began to shake. Helen Langston. When the house isn't home anymore. It wasn't a bestseller. It didn't need to be. The local library hosted a launch. 50 folding chairs filled the room, and most of them were taken. Marta sat in the front row, dabbing her eyes before I even said a word. Jason flew in for it. He helped set up the chairs and brought Emma, who was polite and gentle and thank God nothing like the daughter-in-law I feared he might choose. She hugged me. A real hug. The kind that lingers. "I've read your words," she whispered. "I want to learn from you." And somehow, that broke something inside me. In a good way. Jason stayed for 5 days. He fixed the fence out back, helped Marta carry firewood for her stove, and even volunteered at the food pantry with me one morning. He asked me, while we were walking along the lake trail, "Do you think people change?" I took my time answering. I think people reveal, eventually, who they really are. Sometimes it takes breaking, sometimes silence, but eventually, the truth comes out. He nodded slowly. "And what did I reveal?" "That you were hurting, that you were afraid of being small in your own life, so you made me smaller to feel taller." He flinched a little, but he didn't run from it. "I don't want to be that person again," he said. "I want to be better. Not just to you, but to whoever I become a father to." I stopped walking. "Are you?" He smiled, sheepish. "Emma's 3 months along." I gasped, and then I laughed, and then I cried. That night, I knitted for the first time in years. Not a scarf or a hat. A tiny pair of booties. Sky blue. In early spring, a woman named Carol from the town council stopped by my cabin. She had a clipboard and a clipboard face. "We're planning a series of community elder talks," she said. "We want people to hear about aging, resilience, family, from those who've lived it." She'd read my book. So had most of the council, apparently. "Would you consider speaking at the town center?" I blinked. "You mean me?" She grinned. "You've lived what we're all terrified to say out loud." So I stood again. Before strangers. Before elders. Before teenagers forced by their parents to attend for extra credit. And I told the truth. About loneliness. About invisibility. About giving too much, too long, without boundaries. "I thought motherhood would be my legacy," I said, voice steady. But it was actually the way I reclaimed myself that became the most powerful part of my life. After that, things moved quickly. An agent contacted me. Another small press requested a second book. An online forum of single mothers started reading my memoir in book clubs across the country. I began receiving letters handwritten from women in Tennessee, Oregon, even as far as Nova Scotia. One woman wrote, "I gave my son my home. He gave me silence in return. Your book gave me the courage to take back my name." Another said, "I sat in a broken chair, too. I just didn't realize it until I read your story." And one letter, scrawled in shaky pencil, "Thank you for showing me it's not too late to choose myself. I'm 81. I just bought a bus ticket to see the ocean for the first time." I taped that one above my writing desk. I read it every day. Jason called weekly now, not out of obligation, out of respect. And something better than love had grown between us, understanding. He no longer saw me as a shadow in the corner of his life. He saw me as a whole person. When Emma entered her third trimester, he asked gently, "Would you consider coming down for the birth?" I paused. "It's your space," I said. "Are you sure?" "We want you there," he said. "Not as a babysitter. Not as backup. As family." So I packed my things and boarded a train. No car this time. I wanted to see the world roll by the birches, the rivers, the small towns with their quiet grief and glory. When I arrived, Jason picked me up himself. We didn't talk much on the drive. We didn't need to. Emma went into labor on a rainy Tuesday in April. I held her hand while Jason paced. 12 hours later, I held my granddaughter in my arms. Her name was Margaret Helen. They named her after me. My mother's name. And mine. I stayed a month. I cooked. I laughed. I held the baby at 3 a.m. while Emma slept. I showed Jason how to swaddle her, how to warm a bottle with just his hands when the power flickered. I told him about the time I held him during a blackout, using a flashlight and prayer to keep him calm. He listened. And this time, he remembered. On my last night there, Jason took me to the backyard. The grill was gone. In its place, a small garden, freshly tilled, a row of herbs already sprouting. "I wanted to show you I remember," he said. "What this place is really for. What home is." I reached for his hand. He held it tight. When I left, I didn't feel like I was being discarded. I felt like I was departing in my own terms. With a full heart. With peace. And with something far more valuable than regret. A second chance. Back at the cabin, the silence felt different. Not empty. Not lonely. It felt like completion. The trees rustled with a late spring breeze. Birds danced between branches, and I unpacked slowly, savoring the stillness that had once scared me. But now, I wasn't running from anything. I had run toward something. Myself. Marta welcomed me back with a pot of stew and a warm hug. "How's the baby?" she asked. "Perfect," I said, grinning. Tiny hands, big lungs, and the softest sigh you've ever heard. "You ready to be a long-distance grandma?" "I'm ready to be the kind of grandma I needed as a mother," I said. Present, but not swallowed whole. She nodded slowly, approvingly. "You really did change." "No," I said. "I came back." That week, I began drafting my second book. It wasn't about pain this time. Not entirely. It was about forgiveness. Not the shiny kind we give to make peace with others, but the quiet, messy kind we offer ourselves when we finally stop pretending we're okay. I called it permission to leave the porch light off. Because sometimes, walking away is not abandonment. It's survival. Jason sent photos daily. Margaret in her yellow onesie. Margaret yawning. Margaret gripping his finger with hers like she was holding onto the universe. One afternoon, I received a video. It was Jason, holding Margaret in the backyard garden. "See this?" he said to her softly. "This is where my mom showed me what staying silent looks like. But it's also where she taught me how to speak again." He kissed her forehead. And I'll never forget it. Summer turned the lake water warm, and I started swimming again. Each morning before the sun was too high, I waded in arms cutting through the glassy surface, toes brushing soft mud below. I hadn't done that since I was a girl. But now I was unafraid of what floated below. One morning, as I toweled off near the rocks, a young woman approached me. "You're Helen, right? The author?" I blinked, surprised. "Yes." She held up her phone. "I just read your first book. My mom sent it to me. We haven't spoken in 4 years. I think I'm going to call her." Tears welled in her eyes. "Thank you." In the fall, I began touring small towns. Library basements. Church halls. Community centers where the coffee was lukewarm and the chairs always squeaked. I read my story over and over again each time, like peeling a layer from old skin. And always, women came up after, holding their stories like offerings. I was kicked out of my daughter's house after I broke my hip. My son didn't invite me to his wedding. My grandchildren don't know my name. And sometimes, I left too. I just wish I hadn't waited so long. We cried. We held hands. We reminded each other we were not broken, we're unfinished. In Kansas, a retired nurse asked me, "Do you think motherhood has an expiration date?" I said no, but martyrdom does. Letters still arrived by the dozen. One in particular stayed with me. "Dear Helen, my son asked me to stay out of the living room so his friends could watch football. I sat in the garage with the dog and cried. Then I read your book. I packed a bag. I found a room in a small retirement community. It's quiet, but mine. Thank you for giving me permission to choose myself without apology. Evelyn, age 74. By late October, just as leaves were turning rust red and gold again, I received an invitation. Jason and Emma were hosting Margaret's christening. They wanted me there, not as a guest, but to speak. I drove down slowly, stopped at every scenic overlook, every fruit stand, every little antique shop that called my name. When I finally arrived, Jason met me in the driveway with a long hug. "Welcome home," he said. "I'm visiting," I smiled. He nodded. "But it's your home if you ever want it." "I have mine," I replied. "And you helped me find it." The christening was small, quiet, beautiful. They held it under a canopy of old trees, with fairy lights woven through the branches. Margaret wore a lace gown passed down from Emma's grandmother. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't read a passage or give a rehearsed talk. I simply held my granddaughter in my arms and said, "I once thought motherhood ended when your child stopped needing you. But I was wrong. It ends when you stop needing yourself." I kissed Margaret's forehead. "And I will never stop being me again." After the ceremony, a few guests came up to shake my hand. One man, probably in his 40s, said, "You made me call my mom today." A woman whispered, "I'm going to buy your book for all my sisters." Another, older lady with pearl earrings touched my arm and said, "I was waiting for someone to say what we've all been too ashamed to say. Thank you for saying it with grace." That night, Jason and I sat on the porch after everyone else had gone. "You remember that day?" he asked. "The barbecue?" I nodded. Every detail. "I was awful. You were lost," I said, "and I enabled it." He was quiet for a moment. "Thank you for leaving," he said. I smiled softly. "Thank you for making me want to come back." I returned to Vermont the next day. To the cabin, the quiet, the trails, but not to the woman who once sat silently in a broken chair. She was long gone. In her place was someone fuller, older, brighter. The next spring, I published permission to leave the porch light off. It sold better than the first, because the first one told my pain. The second one told my power. Sometimes, I still hear from women who've read my story. One day, I received a message from a woman named Ruth, 82 years old. It simply said, "You don't know me, but you saved me. I'm finally living in a home where my name is on the mailbox, not just the grocery list." And every morning, I whisper to myself, "I am not invisible." I printed that, framed it, hung it above my desk. So now, when I sit at my window with my third cup of coffee, watching the sunrise turn the lake gold, I no longer wonder if I matter. I no longer wait for a child to say, "You belong," because I say it to myself. Every day, with certainty, with kindness, with presence. I am here. I always was. I just needed to remember it. Epilogue: The Birthday Letter. Vermont, 5 years later. The leaves had just begun to turn a soft orange, spilling across the trees like a quiet reminder that time was moving again. Helen sat at her writing desk near the window, the same desk where she had written 2 books, answered hundreds of letters, and, today, was working on something far more personal. A letter. For someone small, but important. She dipped the pen in ink and began. "Dear Margaret, today you turn 5. Your father says you've started asking big questions: why the moon follows the car, why the dog dreams, why your mother sometimes stares at you like she's memorizing your face. One day, you'll ask about me too. Not the Nana who sends hand-knit scarves and wooden toys and cherry jam every holiday, but the woman I was before you ever existed. The version of me your father once forgot and later remembered. I want you to know her. I want you to know that once upon a time, I sat alone in a broken chair while people laughed without me just 20 feet away. I want you to know that I almost stayed small because I thought that was what love demanded. But I left. And in doing so, I found myself. It took me 68 years to remember that I mattered not because I was someone's mother, but because I was someone. And I hope you never forget that either. You are not just a daughter, or a student, or one day, a friend, a worker, a mother. You are you. Whole. Enough. Brilliant as you are. And if any Oniver makes you feel invisible in your own story, I hope you walk away not in anger, but in courage. Because leaving doesn't mean you stopped loving. It means you started loving yourself, too. Happy birthday, my darling. With all my fierce, quiet, unstoppable love. Nana Helen. She folded the letter, slipped it into a small envelope with pressed violets from her garden, tucked it into the back of a scrapbook marked for Margaret to open at 18. And then she walked outside, down the path to the lake, the morning sun brushing her shoulders like an old friend. The chair by the shore was whole, sturdy, waiting. She sat, smiling,